Joe, did you hear from Charles at all?
I did not. I'll check my email again.
Okay. Give him another minute or two. I'm trying to open that script now.
Okay, I'm going to start webinar. Okay, thank you. I got it going. Thanks. Okay. You're good there. Okay, we're good to go.
Okay, great. Hi, Charles.
Hey, Grant. Hey, everyone.
Okay, well, let's get started. And before we do, I'm going to read a quick bit of language regarding the webinar itself. So thanks for joining our meeting being held via Zoom webinar. When I call for public comment, please use the raise lower hand feature to let me know you wish to be recognized. Our host will allow you to unmute your mic. If you have joined us by phone today, you can raise and lower your hand by pressing *9. So that's *9 to raise and lower your hand, and mute and unmute by pressing *6. If you are participating by phone, I'll call on you by reading the last 4 digits of your phone number. If you are participating by computer, I'll call the name that was listed when you entered our webinar. All right.
Okay, guys. Roll call. Charles.
Here.
Edward.
Mute.
Edward's here. You're on mute, Ed.
All right, I got it. You hear me now?
Okay. Yep, you're good. Deanna. Here. Christine. Out. And Daniel.
Here.
Okay, we're good to go. Thanks, guys.
Great. So we just have one agenda item this evening, and essentially that is to sort of review where we are with our documents themselves. I have incorporated your comments and revisions, so we can quickly go through that. And then we had a bit of homework related to how to include social equity and inclusion aspects to our process and our documents. And then I wanted to quickly sort of create a roadmap for you guys for how we sort of go about, proceeding from here and adopting these tools, and get your input on that as well. So we can get out of here pretty quickly if we want to, or we also can take the full 2 hours if we need to. So any questions so far? Okay, I'm gonna attempt to share my screen here. So essentially what I've done, and I'll let you guys sort of dictate how we want to go through this if we even do, but first I just want to say we sort of went through each edit or revision or comment one by one at our last meeting, and I think we came to a consensus on each one of those. I took notes and then I incorporated what we decided into both documents. So I have those here if we want to go through them. I'll leave that up to you guys first, and then second, any other things that have popped into your head, epiphanies, questions, comments, concerns. So any thoughts on what you guys kind of want to do? Do we want to go through this again or what?
I would be pretty comfortable with your incorporation without having to go through them line by line.
Okay.
I agree.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
Great. Okay. So yeah. So again, I've incorporated those. Any further before we sort of dip into? I've got some of the emails or all of the emails that you guys sent related to social equity and inclusion. We can pull that stuff up in just a second. But before we do, any other thoughts, questions, comments, concerns related to these documents, or anything around the process itself?
I mean, I think it was Charles that said at one point, this is a very serviceable, more than serviceable document for our purposes. And as we use it, if we come up with issues or whatever, we can modify. But I think this is well said and very usable.
Okay. And I'm going to do one more sort of thorough comb through with formatting and making sure there's not misplaced periods, and just do one final fine tooth comb cleanup of it as well. But I certainly won't change anything substantive. So that being said, let's talk about social equity and inclusion. And I guess before we do that, I did want to bring up one thing. It's relatively minor, but I took a stab at, let's see. Bear with me for 1 second. So I think that we all agreed that we would add something to the cultural/historic resources section related to the adverse effect of the project on those potential resources. So what I did was I added this question here in orange, if you guys can see that. And basically I said, if these values or resources are present, to what extent does the proposed project avoid or mitigate adverse impact to those resources? Does that seem like a fair way to assess that? Because we obviously want to, if it highly avoids or mitigates those impacts, that's obviously a positive thing. So I wanted to keep it in line with the way our scoring is.
I think that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, nicely done. I like it.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, I agree.
And then I think the last sort of outstanding question or sort of topic for discussion was sort of how we framed our language down in the additional notes section. And so I think it was Edward that proposed some language, and I took it and just sort of tweaked it just a bit. And I sort of built on what he put, and that's here in orange. Does that sound clear and workable?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well said.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to pull up the emails that you guys sent, and just to help sort of refresh ourselves on that discussion and go from there. I don't know if anybody has anything off the top of their head that they were planning to talk about related to this topic. Just feel free to speak freely if you do. So the way that I look at, so Edward, this is a good comment. I think the way that we've addressed that is in this additional notes section here.
Right.
So to me, that's identifying threats. Does that adequately capture what you were getting at?
Well, the language you put in there talk more about conflicts between uses. This wasn't so much conflict oriented as other detrimental qualities of the site. The other one, let me see.
So I do have, please note any potential threats and or possible conflicts. And then it does speak more, it gives an example of the conflicts, but
Right.
we could either explicitly call out an example of, what sort of the crux of what you're getting at, or we could incorporate it elsewhere. I don't know.
I guess that's okay. You've got the word threats and, describes, I had described site characteristics that might, such as this was a little bit more explicit on some of the types of things that could be impediments to use or
Right.
just negative features of the property.
Yeah. I see how that there could be a distinction between a threat and an impediment. Yeah, I do see that.
Or a threat and a conflict in use. You got two positives, in the sense of a conflict in use, you have two positive things that may interfere, like recreation or high wildlife value. Both of those are positive, but there's possibly an inherent conflict between them as opposed to something that's just kind of negative any way you look at it, but
Sure.
the property.
Yeah. No, I think conflicting values is totally different than impediments or threats. I think we've got that. I just perhaps what you have in quotations there, that might be best suited for an application type prompt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean another way of looking at that is a lens through which to evaluate a project. So you guys have this in mind. I mean, it should be sort of in your metric when you evaluate a project to look at things like this. But the question is, do we want to explicitly incorporate it into the application or the evaluation? So I could see it going either way, and I'd be happy. I don't know if others have thoughts.
Well, I don't think we need anything as long as what I had there in my original quote. I was just wondering if in what you had written, if another word or two might just capture that, where you say threats, please describe any threats such as noxious weeds or conflicting neighboring property uses. Let's see, without making that sentence too long.
Well, so I think we have prompts for those things, right? We have, is the potential, or proposed land use for this project or property compatible with or appropriate for its surroundings, basically. We ask that specifically, and then we specifically ask about noxious or invasive weeds. And so to me, those are prompts for discussion, and they inform a decision. But I can also think of, I think what you're asking is, are there any sort of catastrophic factors that might lead to a project not coming to fruition, or something that would significantly affect the plan for the project itself?
And I excuse me, because I'm not remembering the other elements, the other prompts very well, but if there is, noxious weeds and neighboring, if those are already covered, there's no need to put them in here. If those are covered elsewhere in the questionnaire.
Yeah, I feel like they are, but I'm open to debate, of course.
I don't know what other people think.
Yeah, I kind of feel like that gets adequately hit on in some of the other sections, because I asked about noxious weeds, and then there's the one about appropriate or suitable with other land uses. I feel like that.
Yeah. If that's the case, I'm good with what you've already got written there, and just let it go.
Okay. And then Danny provides some comments related to social equity. And I think, yeah, you're just sort of noting that we don't speak directly or indirectly to social equity a whole heck of a lot. And so, yeah, and I think that your comment at the end there is the primary question. We've talked about how these tools are a guide for facilitating discussion and informing our decisions and recommendations. And so, we all know that social equity and inclusion are primary components of vetting projects and becoming even increasingly more important. So the question is, do we want to infuse more of that language into these documents, or have we sort of asked that question enough to prompt a discussion that is, pretty robust around that topic? And I don't know that I have a strong opinion either way myself.
I really like Danny's idea that, first of all, he suggests that it's already in there in a couple of ways. And I think those are the important ways personally. And so beyond that, it's just a matter of our discussion when we evaluate the property where it could come up again. So I think that covers it quite well.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like if we were actually, if the scores we were giving were actually weighted, and if we were adding up tallies and all that, I think it would be important to maybe make it a larger component of that form. But since the primary purpose of the form is just to start discussion, I think it's probably adequately addressed.
Okay, great.
No,
Sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I have thought about this issue a lot in the context of the, kind of holistic planning of where we should be investing, scarce resources. And I've often wondered if it's within our purview or who is standing back and saying, okay, here are our underserved areas. We should be out, in a sense, soliciting projects, or so this is well beyond the scope of what we're discussing here, but it just brings to mind whether the Open Space Advisory Committee should be standing back at even a more of a, at the 30,000 or at the 5,000 foot level, looking at the entire community and saying, okay, here are the underserved communities. Here's where social equity needs to be addressed better. How can we do that? So that, this is beyond the scope of this particular review document, but it does call to mind whether we do have that charge or that responsibility to take a bigger look at the community.
Sure.
A little bit of part, I thought, of the broader parks plan, wasn't it? That like the goal was to have something within like 15 minutes of all neighborhoods and whatnot. Not that we wouldn't be involved in ways that you're talking about, Ed, but I do think it is incorporated to an extent within the broader, I can't remember the name of the acronym that we were using for it now, but
right,
broader program.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, we would be acting as a bridge. We have these community-wide standards, the 15 minutes, which wasn't really, that was raised as a public comment. That was something that people addressing that overall planning document brought to the document as a way to implement some of these things. But, there's these overarching goals for the community. And then we get down to the project level, but is there a role for us in between to say, we should be really seeing if we can push projects in area X, Y, or Z, and with demographics such and such, and some bigger picture kind of things than just being a project by project review or organization review committee. So again, that's beyond the scope of what we're dealing here, but it's been sitting in the back of my mind for a while as to whether we should be taking on that role too. Or who is taking on that role?
I don't think it's beyond the scope of this at all. I mean, I think it's beyond the direct scope of talking about these documents, but I think asking that question is the first step and a good one. And I think that, yeah, like Deanna said, I think it is part of our master parks plan. It's part of our open space plan. It's mentioned throughout almost all of our planning documents. And that's, again, is what informs our decision. So I think that's a great question. And I think it's sort of up to us and to you guys, how far out you want to zoom or how far in you want to zoom. I think obviously, as a baseline, you're going to vet every open space project that is requesting bond funds or city open space funds. But we can talk about, it's a good time to do that at our next OSAC meeting, actually. Talk about what the year looks like. Do we want to bring some folks in? If you guys want to go on research missions or connect with me on some of your ideas, I mean, I'm always open to that. So just so you know, I'm just throwing that out there. So I think it's a wonderful question, and asking it is the right first step. And I don't think that there is a definite answer to that question. I think it's up to you guys. It's up to us. Just so you know, I mean, I think parks and recreation in general, that's infused in our mission. So there are other people working on that as well, as far as, we have other sources of funds from impact fees and parkland dedication or cash in lieu, from subdivisions that are dedicated to those areas that are developing. So, I mean, there's other avenues to address gaps in sort of geographic distribution of parks. But I think that should always sort of be part of our metric as well. So my rambling, good question. Let's continue to think about that. And I also wanted to mention that I thought long and hard when I was sort of designing the structure of these tools in this process. And that was one of the reasons I specifically chose not to weight certain things and come up with just a sort of a score, was because I think that it's not fully scientific, right? This process is a bit subjective. It's informed by a lot of different plans and backgrounds and perspectives. And so again, this is just to facilitate conversation and discussion. And that's exactly what it's doing here. And so again, I just wanted to convey again that was by design, because I think it's nearly impossible to find a way that really works on the ground to weigh these very important and sometimes conflicting values.
Yeah, well said. Thank you.
End rant there. Okay, so we feel good about sort of what we have included in the documents. It sounds like on at least on Danny's notes there. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then I think we have, Charles's, and then we have one more email from Christine. So I'm just reading through this again.
My comment was really just in line with what Daniel was saying. I was just trying to put some more fence posts around the idea to note that, it's about the acquisition of land. It's about a lot of other things that's outside of the scope of our work.
Sure. But I would argue that there's some overlap. I mean, I think it is outside the direct scope, but to your second point there, this is sort of an aside, but I'm planning on having Morgan Valiant, our conservation lands manager. Well, he's the superintendent of ecosystem services now, but he was formerly the conservation lands manager. I'm having him come in at our February OSAC meeting to sort of lay out his plan for the year, where we are with the stewardship mill levy, just to talk about his program in general. And so I think a lot of that a lot of the components in your second comment there will be hashed out there, and you'll have a chance to ask Morgan questions, which will be, I think, pretty beneficial.
Great.
Let's see what Christine said. Oh yeah, Christine mentions acknowledgement, which I think is something that is more at the forefront certainly than it used to be. I think it's something good to talk about. I don't necessarily know how we sort of directly bring it into the process. I mean, I can think of a couple of different ways. I don't know if we want to. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
I mean, for larger trailheads, especially having some sort of land acknowledgement sign, I think is at least the simplest way to start addressing some of these things.
Right.
Because I know it's a Five Valley sign, but every time I go up Waterworks, I think about how they have a sign honoring the white folks that donated the easement through there, but there's no sign acknowledging the land it originally belonged to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that again, that's going back to Charles' second point. That's sort of outside our direct scope as OSAC. That's more on the Conservation Lands Advisory Committee and the Conservation Lands Manager. But I think these are excellent points to bring up when we have Morgan come and talk, because to hear it from you guys as sort of the front end of a project, and then it sort of leads into his purview. I think that would be helpful for him to hear it from you guys. Any other thoughts on Christine's comments or social equity in general and inclusion?
In addition to Morgan Valiant, it could be interesting to hear from somebody who has somebody else at the city maybe who has some good data on where the most open underserved areas are as far as open space, trails, parks, etc. I mean, we could make a pretty good guess at that. Between Russell and Reserve would be one, but I think it would be, I know that data is out there. I know the Transportation Planning Department has some of those layers and stuff for the maps based mostly off of like location and transit and trails and things like that. But that somebody who could give us maybe a fill in on that could be interesting.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I had that thought too, and I think Morgan will have some pretty good information related to that. I mean, he's been working in Parks and Rec directly for over a decade, I think. So he's got his finger on the pulse of everything that goes on related to parks and trails and open space. I think Donna also is a wizard when it comes to just identifying those areas. So I will see if I can get somebody, or maybe Morgan's sufficient. I'll talk to him. But I'll see if I can get somebody to come in February as well. It might be good to have both of those at once, just to have a really sort of thorough discussion.
Are they hiring a person behind Morgan then for his old position? Or?
Yep. Yeah, we actually had that interview process last week. I'm on the hiring committee for that, and so we hope to have some offers out in the next couple of weeks. There's actually quite a bit of openings right now, vacancies in Morgan's program. So he's got his hands full trying to fill those gaps. Before I jump into sort of our next steps and the kind of the roadmap to getting these tools adopted, any other thoughts, questions? Okay. So feel free to let me know what you guys think about this, but my plan is it seems like we have a consensus around our language and in the documents themselves and our process in general. My plan is to, starting probably tomorrow or this week, sort of route these documents and this process around internally to a couple of different parks and city staff, just to get their perspective, from the other side, from the staff side. Besides myself, it's always good to have some other sharp minds take a look at these documents from a little bit different perspective. Give them a couple of weeks, or I guess probably a month until our next OSAC meeting, and then assuming there aren't substantial changes, and I'll certainly keep you apprised if there are, what those changes, if any, look like. But assuming there aren't substantial changes, do you think we're ready to sort of unveil these documents in this process to the full OSAC as soon as February? Does that make sense to you guys? And sort of my thought was that the full OSAC board we would go through it like we have done here, kind of providing some context around why we did what we did and how we came to this iteration, and then have OSAC sort of formally vote to adopt the tools in the process. Does that sound like a good course of action to you guys?
I think we're there.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And obviously, I'm going to circulate it to Donna and some other park staff, and if there are some substantial changes, then I think that we'll probably call another subcommittee meeting to address those before we would take it to full OSAC. I don't anticipate any, but okay. Well, okay, well, I will proceed with sort of distributing these documents to internal city staff, and then we'll go from there, and I'll keep you guys updated on sort of how that goes. Other than that, I think that's all I had for tonight. Anything else from you guys?
Just one curiosity question. How goes it with Knife River and Knife River Ponds acquisition? Curious.
So I think, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we can, I mean, this is public information. I think I can share this. We have, council voted to approve the transaction and the transfer, and we took ownership in December of the property. The city took ownership. And so we now own it. Everything's been transferred. I think the gate lock has been changed. The power's been transferred over. And so I think sometime later this year, we're going to start the planning process.
Excellent. Excellent.
And it will, it'll likely be, it's sort of a woolly beast. So it'll likely be a couple-year process. And we've got resource assessment and inventory, and we've got restoration plans and things like that to work through. And then the obvious public process to go through that will sort of dictate how that property is used.
Yeah, there'll be there are many interested parties, I believe. That has
I think so
of
too.
Resources.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent opportunity. It's going to be a pretty cool piece of open space. So I'm excited about it. Anything else? Okay. Well, great. That one was quick. Feel free to call me or email me with any questions or concerns or anything you think of that we didn't address here tonight. And otherwise, I'll keep you updated on sort of what comes out of the internal city review of these documents. And then hopefully we'll be able to adopt in February and go from there. And then I did want to mention that I think we talked about this at our last meeting, that we will, we can always use, I wanted to, I think maybe Charles brought it up, go through sort of an example exercise where we take a project from the past or, some hypothetical project, and we evaluate it using our tools. So I'll think about when it makes sense to do that. But I think this can be an evolving document, but before we actually use it on an active project, I wanted OSAC to sort of officially adopt it.
Actually, I think that was Christine's idea.
Oh, okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It wasn't me.
Okay. Give you the credit. Okay. Well, thanks, Christine. So I think that's still the plan, and I think it's a good idea. All right. Well, unless there's anything else, thank you guys for joining and for your contributions and perspective as always, and I will talk to you guys very soon.
Excellent. Good work, Grant. Thank you.
Yeah, good work.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Have a good evening.
See ya.
Joe, are you there?